Mr. Louis Chua.
Mr. Speaker, the relationship between landlord and tenant has always been a symbiotic one, where both parties rely on each other to survive and thrive. Yet it is often also a relationship which is hugely imbalanced, with landlords having a significant advantage over tenants when it comes to lease negotiations. It is this power imbalance which we should strive to address and ensure a more level playing field for tenants, especially small and medium-sized enterprises who are beholden to landlords and with rents being a critical overhead cost for retailers. As what some retailers would say, we are merely working for the landlord. The power disparity and helplessness of tenants came to the fore in recent years as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, where mandatory lockdowns and safe distancing measures put the retail landscape under significant strain. However, the silver lining, of course, was the formation of self-help groups such as the Singapore Tenants United for Fairness, the formation of the Fair Tenancy Pro Tem Committee, and eventually the Code of Conduct for leasing of retail premises and the legislation we see today. To this end, I'm supportive of the bill in its efforts to address certain pain points and unfair leasing terms and conditions that used to be prevalent in the retail landscape. At the same time, however, I will speak broadly on areas for improvement, particularly as it relates to data availability and transparency, which in my view is a core issue that needs to be addressed in enabling a more diverse, inclusive and level playing field for the sustainability of our retail landscape. One way that landlords could wield a disproportionate amount of power at the negotiating table is by exploiting the information disparity between them and the tenants. This enables them to command higher rents during lease negotiations. While clauses 5 and 6 of the bill codify the leasing principles set out in the Code of Conduct for the leasing of retail premises in Singapore, the current code-enhanced legislation does not include data transparency guidelines as a requirement for all qualifying leases. The Code's data transparency leasing principle only applies to landlords who collect sales data from tenants as part of the GTO rent formula. The guidelines call for landlords to share sales data matrix according to trade category, with existing tenants on a biannual basis and on a one-on-one basis before the signing of the lease agreement. However, there is much room for improvement here, especially when I believe the majority of rents today do not incorporate GTO rent arrangements. And hence this leasing principle may not apply to many leases in practice. Can I confirm with the Minister that this is true, and what is the expected percentage of qualifying leases that would require the data transparency principle to be complied with? Retailers, which the Business Times spoke to for an article dated 19 July, further mentioned that data such as fine-grained footfall and rental data would be useful for tenants during lease negotiations. Furthermore, they noted that the sales data provided by landlords should be broken down by floor and subcategory as well. In accounting, there is a concept called decision usefulness, which comes to my mind. Without granular data, the information provided by landlords would be neither useful nor relevant for tenants or potential tenants. For example, if one is a small F&B kiosk operator on the highest floor of a shopping mall, of what use is the total F&B sales for the entire mall if the McDonald's on the ground floor is doing brisk business and likely dominates the consolidated sales figures? Will the Minister consider providing for more fine-grained data to be presented and at a higher frequency versus the current biannual basis? Additionally, lease agreements may contain confidentiality clauses within contracts, prohibiting tenants from sharing information regarding their lease agreements, including rental rates with their counterparts. Landlords, however, could have access to comprehensive data from their tenants' point-of-sale systems, be it across multiple tenants from within the same mall or the same tenant across different malls, thus enabling them to maximize potential rents and hence occupancy costs from the perspective of tenants without causing them to vacate their space. While the new bill certainly helps reduce the power differential between landlords and tenants, enhancing data transparency would certainly help to further reduce this gap. I believe the data transparency guidelines set out in the Code should be mandated under the new legislation, rather than applying only to landlords who collect sales data from tenants as part of the GTO rent structure. May I ask the Minister what are the government's concerns should the data transparency principles be applied to all qualifying retail leases? To take it one step further to truly enable fair and equal access to information for tenants and landlords and tenants alike, I hope that the government would also consider launching a public rental information database similar to that mooted by the Fair Tenancy Framework Industry Committee back in 2020. Back then, the committee shared that it recommends two levels of rental data be made available, namely a public rental information database that is uploaded on a monthly basis, and mall-level productivity and performance data made available by landlords to tenants from whom they require data such as monthly sales data. Not only would such information benefit tenants, especially SME tenants who may not have the ability to compare rents and key retail matrix across locations, smaller landlords will also benefit from the ability to better position their mall in a market dominated by key players. Again, to use an example which arguably is not related to a shopping mall, if you look at the recent concerns over the Geylang Serai Ramadan Bazaar, for example, while many express concerns over the high rental rates, especially for certain food types, in my mind, it is the uncertainty in the ability to make enough revenue to cover costs, to cover rents and other costs that weigh heavily on tenants' minds throughout the tenure of the bazaar. So past sales information and footfall and other retail metrics provided could then help in this decision making. Is the government actively considering such a database, and whether or not the HDB, as one of the largest landlords of retail space, be willing to lead by example and provide such information? While I understand that there are various retail indices being compiled by the URA, the overall market index may not accurately reflect the nuances of the different geographical submarkets, and certainly not the individual malls. Besides enhancing data and information transparency, I believe efforts should also be put into ensuring that tenants are better informed when negotiating their leases and signing the lease agreement. Clause 4E of the bill states that one of the functions of the Fair Tenancy Industry Committee is to conduct outreach and education relating to this Act and the Code of Conduct and matters relating to the leasing of retail premises. I'm supportive of this move. Even while the Code of Conduct has already been introduced on a voluntary basis, smaller retailers today who lack the resources and awareness to vet through contracts could simply sign it without understanding its terms and conditions and any exceptional clauses to be wary of. Therefore, I hope the Minister could provide further information and colour, such as the amount of resources dedicated to outreach and education efforts, especially for our SME retailers. An adjacent point worth considering is whether such a code of conduct can also be extended to non-retail leases, but to other commercial leases such as that for offices or even that for industrial and business park spaces. The SME tenants that are the beneficiaries of the retail code of conduct could also benefit from fairer and more balanced lease negotiations between landlords and tenants of workspaces. Given that significant effort had already been put in by various parties to refine the retail code of conduct, it would be worthwhile, in my view, to look into extending this to other commercial and industrial sectors. May I ask the Minister if this is in the works, and if not, what are the concerns or considerations in this regard? Finally, there seems to be a sentiment among Singaporeans that our retail scene has gone stale, with comments made about how shopping malls are essentially cookie-cutter malls. A quick scroll through the tenant directories of numerous malls that populate our island show that the same chain stores and eateries repeatedly pop up. As someone who frequently patronizes McDonald's and Uniqlo, I can understand why these retailers are doing so well and why many malls would want these ubiquitous names as anchor tenants for their malls. Moreover, such brand name tenants or other international F&B or fashion retailers could potentially also afford higher rents as opposed to the local SME, thus enabling landlords to command higher rentals at their malls and thereby uplifting the valuations of their properties. This could, however, potentially have a stifling and crowding out impact on our local SME retail scene. The passing of this bill is a step in the right direction, but by enhancing data transparency and information sharing and narrowing the gulf in information between SME tenants and retail landlords, I hope more can also be done to better effectively breach the power differential between landlords and tenants, thus providing our smaller retailers with a better fighting chance to sustain their businesses. After all, the shopping mall, of which many populate our island, forms a key backdrop to the everyday experiences and lives of Singaporeans. Fostering an environment that encourages our smaller retailers to flourish could bring greater vibrancy and character to these places and Singapore as a whole. I support the bill.
Order. I propose to take a break now. I will suspend the sitting and will take the chair at 3:45 p.m. Order, order.